Welcome everyone, good afternoon. It is my pleasure on behalf of the student body and the College of Micronesia to welcome our guests from IOM, Ms. Genevieve Grew and Mr. Warren Ching, going over with us today on the importance and the severity of human trafficking, and not only its relation to us, but to our family members, both at home and abroad. Now, without further ado, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Genevieve Grew, and I work for the International Organization for Migration, otherwise known as IOM. And I'm joined here today with my colleague Warren Ching, and also Brandon is in the back somewhere providing support as well. Oh, in the front, here we go. Okay, so for today's presentation, I'm going to start with speaking about safe migration. And then Warren is going to do a brief presentation on human trafficking. And we really want today's presentation to be as interactive as possible. So if at any point you have a question about what I'm saying, please feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand. I really want this to be as much of a dialogue as possible. And I have a few incentives to also help elicit some responses from everyone. If that's okay with you. Okay, so let's get started with safe migration. Warren, if you could go to the next slide. So just to briefly do an overview of what we're going to be speaking about, I'm going to be talking about migration and what is considered unsafe migration and what is safe migration. And then briefly bringing it to the context here, speaking about the compact and what it means for you all potentially. On to the next. Okay, so let's start with a few questions. These are true or false. The first question, migrants only refer to people who crossed an international border. Does anyone have an idea if that is true or false? I need a hand because I need to be able to give out a granola bar. I saw this gentleman had a hand. What was the answer? False. That is correct. Okay, next question. Okay, if someone lives in a foreign country only temporarily, he or she is not a migrant. Is that true or false? Yes. False. Correct. That one is false as well. Good job. Okay, this last one. Students studying abroad are not migrants. True or false? I'm not going for the same person. Who else? In the back. True or false? Correct. Okay, based on that, can you please raise your hand if you think you are a migrant? I'm going to raise my hand. Anyone else think they are migrants based on these scenarios? No one thinks they are a migrant. Everyone was born in, are we in SoCas technically right now? Or is everyone from here directly? No. I'm trying to show that, we are all migrants. At one point in life, we are living somewhere else. We are experiencing something different. So to normalize the term, a lot of people think migrants, they're just foreigners in other countries, but you can actually be internal migrants, and there are a lot of us here, and so we all face some of the same challenges and opportunities as migrants. So that's what I'm going to be highlighting today. Let's go to the next. So again, who is a migrant? And there is no legal definition, one common legal definition on who is a migrant, but IOM uses the definition of a person who moves away from his or her usual residence, either within a country or across an international border, temporarily or permanently, and for a variety of reasons. So this is a very broad definition of a migrant, but it's because there are so many different types of migrants that we use a definition that tries to capture all these individuals. So especially I just want to point out the last part, for a variety of reasons. So people could voluntarily move. That's when they move maybe seeking another job or another education opportunity, or they could be forced to move. That's when you think of different wars going on around the world, or a natural disaster might force you to move from your usual place of residence. So this term migration and migrant really is all-encompassing and looking at any time someone is moving from one place to another. On to the next. Oh, there was my definition. And next. Okay, so a few more questions. But I just want to start with IOM's mission statement is essentially that migration is a very positive phenomenon when it is done in an orderly and regular fashion. So we see that migration is inevitable, meaning it's always going to happen. In this globalized world, people are moving more and more. And then we also see it as necessary. That's because it provides so many benefits in terms of job opportunities for individuals who want to migrate, and in the host community, it provides workers to help fill necessary jobs. If you think, for example, there are a number of countries in the world that have aging populations. So that means they have lots of older people in the population and not so many people in the working age. So they're missing those 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old people. So that's where they have a huge need for workers, and potential migrants from abroad can help fill those jobs. And then finally, we see it as desirable, because the mixing of cultures can be a very beneficial phenomenon, and it can bring a lot of richness to a culture. You can learn new ideas and share experiences. And just in general, we see migration, when it's done in an orderly and regular fashion, as a very positive scenario. So now just a few more questions, if I can. Let's see, this first one. Total number of international migrants globally. Does anyone want to raise their hand and take a guess? Is it 20 million, 58 million, 272 million, or 1 billion? These are international migrants. Anyone else? Yes. How did you know that? You get a notebook for that one. 272 million is correct. Can you click next? This one? Yes. All right, this next one. Now, what about the total number of internal migrants globally? This is people moving within their country. Any guesses? Is it 13 million, 58 million, 763 million, or 1 billion? You just have to guess a number.
C.
Who said C? You are correct. I don't know how you guys know these facts.
Good luck.
Yeah, there you go. Good luck. One more button. So in total, there are considered to be more than 1 billion migrants, both internal and international, worldwide. This means every 1 in 7 persons is considered a migrant. Okay, this next question. The top 3 destinations for international migrants. Does anyone want to take a guess on what 3 countries has the largest number of international migrants in the country? Anyone want to take a guess? 3 countries. Who has a lot of migrants in them? You want to take a guess?
USA.
That is correct. That's one of them. Okay, USA is one. I need 2 more countries.
Australia.
China.
No, close.
Australia.
Nope. Nope.
Canada?
Nope. Okay, this is hard, I know. The other answers are Germany, not the Philippines, and Saudi Arabia. So a lot of Middle Eastern migrants go to Saudi Arabia. And Germany has a whole mix of migrants from European countries to African countries to Middle Eastern countries. So US, Germany, and Saudi Arabia are considered the top destinations for international migrants. Okay, and then this next question. Women and girls comprise of what percent of international migrants? What would you guess? Women and girls. Are they more likely to be migrants? Are they less likely to be migrants?
Less.
More likely?
Less.
Okay, the answer is actually 48%. So it's about half. So about half of international migrants are considered women and girls. And then this last question. Forced displacement across international borders. This is relating to what I was saying with either natural disasters or war, conflict. Do you think that's increasing or decreasing?
Increase.
Yeah, it is increasing. I don't know if anyone follows the news closely internationally, but Afghanistan these past few months has been going through massive turmoil, and Afghans have been fleeing for their lives for safety, either across borders into Pakistan or getting on flights and trying to get to other countries. So we definitely are seeing a rise in terms of forced displacement in the world. Okay, next slide. So then turning it to our context here in the Pacific. I think none of this is new news to you all, but we know the main destination for Micronesians is largely the US mainland, Guam, Hawaii, in terms of migrant destinations. And they're at pretty high levels. I think we all know people who have moved abroad or have family members or friends who travel. So just highlighting that mobility is a clear part of life here, and people are always moving and seeking other opportunities. And I also want to highlight there's a lot of internal migration that's obviously happening here. Because who here, for example, is from Koshrai or Yap or Chuk? Can I see just some hands? Or even outer islands of Pohnpei. Yeah, so you all are migrants, you're part of this phenomenon, and there's a lot of internal migration happening here. And we often see people moving to the US for education opportunities or better access to healthcare or other jobs. So those are the main drivers of migration in our Pacific context. The next. So, like I've explained, migration is an irreversible trend that is happening globally and also here in the Pacific. And it's one of the defining features of the 21st century and contributes to economic and social development everywhere. Migration, when it happens in a safe and regular way, is beneficial to both the migrants and the community they're going to. They can bring, migrants can access better education, healthcare, whatnot, and the host countries or the host communities can have the labor that they might need and skills and diversity. But on the other hand, when migration occurs in an irregular way, there are a lot of dangers. So this picture on the right, for example, is showcasing the phenomenon of migrant smuggling. So smuggling is when someone willingly agrees to be transported across a border, but they're doing that in an illegal fashion. They're trying to sneak into a country, essentially. And it can be extremely dangerous for the individual. Okay, so brief scenarios as we're talking about safe and unsafe migration. Let's just look at this case number 1. So Jane found an easy, well-paying job in Guam on Facebook and got an offer after applying. Her employer said that they could discuss details of the contract once she arrived in Guam. He also promised that he will take care of accommodation and work permit. So excited to start a new job, Jane decides to hop on a flight to Guam this week. Okay, that's scenario number 1. Then scenario number 2. John has dreamed of working and living in New Zealand for a long time and finally decides to act on his dream. Although he has not yet found a job, he decides to enter the country with a tourist visa and try to find a job. Can I please hear from someone about what are some red flags they see in these cases and maybe alternative options or what they could have done differently? Yes.
Red flag is Facebook.
Yeah. So what about that?
It's Facebook.
So don't believe everything you see on Facebook?
It
That's the
can
idea.
be true, but sometimes it can be a false information.
There are a lot of scams on Facebook, right? So what could you do to avoid, if you see a job posted on Facebook and you're really interested, what do you think you could do?
Go to the government, ask them permission to call the company and ask them if it's true that the company will show on Facebook.
Yeah, so did everyone hear that? He was suggesting to check with like the Department of Labor, for example, to see if it was a legitimate company. That's a very valid option. You can do some of your own research, trying to look up the organization, see if it's legitimate, talk to other people, but don't just jump on a flight. That's basically what we're trying to say. And what about for case number 2? Does anyone see? John just wants to go to New Zealand and he's going on a tourist visa, but he wants to work. Anyone know what might be troubling about that situation? A visa will expire, and technically he's not allowed to work on a tourist visa. That's usually how it goes. Yeah, so he doesn't seem like he prepared very much. He just wants to go. He made up his mind and is just going for it. So these are examples of potentially unsafe migration that we would want to be avoiding. So those were examples of also, those weren't. So this, now I'm going to talk about irregular migration. And a term you might have heard, especially if you follow news in the US, is illegal migrants. So as IOM, we do not like to use the term illegal migrant because it makes it seem like that person is illegal. And no human being is illegal. Maybe an act they are doing is illegal, but the individual is not illegal. So we use the term irregular because they are moving in an irregular fashion. They could be individuals who enter a country illegally, crossing a border. They might not have the right visa or papers to be in the country. They might have stayed too long, or they don't have a work permit. And irregular migrants can face deportation and criminal procedures and penalties. And more importantly, it increases their own risks. They don't necessarily, because they're in an irregular status, they're somewhat hiding in that society. They don't feel like they can access health care or other services that require a valid identification or proper paperwork. So there are a lot of dangers around irregular migration. Warren, could you go to the next? So I just wanted to bring one brief example from our context here. Is anyone here from YAP? Okay. Do you all remember in 2014 when a boat of migrants, of Nepalese and Indian migrants, showed up off the shore of YAP? Does anyone remember that? Back in 2014. So this was big news because it's not often that boats are showing up on our shores with individuals from foreign countries other than fishermen. But these individuals had been put on a boat by smugglers in Indonesia and been told they were going to reach the United States or Australia or New Zealand. They had no plans to be showing up in Micronesia, but they were going in an irregular fashion. So they showed up and were detained for more than a year at the harbor in Yap because the FSM didn't really know what to do with the individuals. We're not used to having migrants show up here all of a sudden. And they were claiming asylum, which means they said they were seeking asylum, which means seeking refugee status, saying it was not safe for them to return home. So they were looking to get to a new country and claim asylum. And in the end, there were assessments done on the individuals about their refugee claims, and it was determined that only 4 of them met the criteria to be a refugee, and IOM helped then resettle them to Sweden. Sweden agreed to accept 4 of the Nepalese refugees from here, and the rest of the Nepalese and Indians migrants, they willingly returned back home. But the process took 2-3 years, so it was very long. They were in very poor conditions while they were here, and it just goes to show that irregular migration can be extremely dangerous and have a lot of unintended consequences. I'm sure if they knew what scenario they were getting themselves into, they might have never left. So that's one example from here I wanted to share. Next slide. So again, unprepared and ill-informed migration can be very dangerous. And even if you do it in a regular way, if you are not personally prepared for it, it can lead to disappointment when you get to a new place. You might not have the proper living or working conditions. You might feel isolated, and you might not be sure how to access healthcare or social services in the new country. And there are more risks of unsafe migration. It can even put you in a more vulnerable position to human trafficking or to exploitation, whether it's sexual or labor exploitation. And you can get involved in criminal acts and face deportation and penalties. So I want to play a brief video clip. Let's see if it'll work for us. Maybe, is it easy to hit the lights for a moment? Sorry, it's really small. clip, if you don't mind the lights again, about showing an example of human trafficking and how it can start with a great job advertisement online and a recruiter promising a great job opportunity, and then things suddenly changing, and an individual being in a vulnerable position when they're in a new country. Maybe they don't speak the language, maybe they don't have any cash of their own, and feel like they can't get out of a situation. So Warren is going to be speaking a bit more about human trafficking in the next session, but I wanted to briefly describe that one. And another example from our context here. Does anyone remember in the news back in 2019, there were claims in the US with an Iowa pork processing plant, which had a number of Micronesians working there. And the Micronesians had reported abuse of the company, saying there was possibly human trafficking and labor and verbal abuse. And the allegations included that the company had seized their passports, had issued them false social security numbers, refused to provide copies of their employment contracts, and the work was inconsistent with what they had been promised. So this is a real-life example of Micronesians thinking they're going into a situation where they have control, working at the pork processing plant, and then getting into a dangerous scenario. And the last that I could read, I looked through recent news articles to see if there was any update, but the last I saw was President Penuelo asking the US to look more into this situation. And I'm not really sure what the status of it is, if the individuals are still there, but just to know that this is a somewhat common occurrence that does happen. And one of the issues, for example, that we often see in these scenarios is an employer will agree to pay for your flights to come somewhere, and they'll say, we're just going to take it out of your next paychecks. But somehow there's miscommunication and more money is being taken out of your paycheck because the employer says, oh, you need to pay me back because I brought you here, and there are all these costs associated with it. So just to know that there can be a lot of details that are manipulated in these scenarios. Okay, also, I know everyone is very internet savvy and knows how to see what is fake online, but I think it's an important point to emphasize again that there are a number of cyber crimes which involve false advertising of jobs and can also put someone at risk of human trafficking. I want to play another brief video clip.
At the end of last year, Facebook had 1.8 billion users worldwide.
For many, posting and liking comments is just part of our daily lives, but those posts can sometimes turn into targets for sex traffickers.
Tonight, 15 Finds Out investigator Alyssa Ivanson continues her series Hidden Predators, digging deeper into how social media is used to trap victims.
Well, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, you've likely heard of those social media sites. But how about Kik, or Yik Yak, or Chat Roulette? All of them could be places predators solicit your kids, and you could have no idea they're being targeted.
It takes 24 hours to traffic a kid from the time they meet them online. 24 hours.
It can happen to anyone. Meeting up with someone from social media, and then they might disappear.
Post, like, comment, share. Social media is a big part of people's lives, especially America's youth.
Well, social media isn't evil itself, but it can be used for evil. Social media has opened up access.
Social media is designed to connect people, but it also makes it easier for predators to connect with their next victim.
Before, you'd have to go sit in front of schools and places where kids would play. so that you could find kids that were out there that you could watch and maybe see if they were susceptible. Now you can just hop online and you've been friends with somebody. You see they're out there and somebody just takes it upon themselves to see if they can prey on them.
Anyone you don't know in the real world is a stranger.
We wouldn't let strangers into our house. Why are we letting them into these kids' phones?
Many cases of sex trafficking start online and seem harmless at first.
People that want to hear that they're special and beautiful or handsome and smart, all the things that we want to hear, well, why wouldn't they say that to you? They're going to tell you that. Do they believe it? Probably not.
It's called grooming. Traffickers will monitor posts, pick their target, and prey on their weaknesses.
Traffickers look for naive children, and they look for kids who are needy. If they're talking about they're sad and they're depressed, well, that's a kid I can recruit. I can get to that kid.
All right, I just wanted to show the brief clip. If you don't mind the lights again. And I know you all are very good with the internet, you practice safety, but just to watch out for younger siblings or to talk to your family members to make sure that they know how to use the internet safely and what to look out for. Okay, next slide. I know everything I kind of just said makes it seem like migration is very dangerous, scary, bad, but I want to emphasize that it is a very positive phenomenon when it's done in a safe manner. So in safe migration, migrants, they use the regular migration pathways. That means booking a flight, making sure you have the right visas and your passport is up to date. And migrants are provided with timely and accurate information throughout all stages of migration. They're aware of their rights and also their obligations in the new country. For example, maybe seatbelts aren't required by law here in FSM, but if you go to the US, you could get a ticket for not wearing your seatbelt. They have appropriate legal identity and documentation, and they're recruited in a fair and ethical manner and guaranteed safe conditions that ensure decent work. So next, I just wanted to ask if anyone has any thoughts or can share any ideas about what you think are some of the common challenges faced by Micronesian migrants abroad, and if anyone has a relative or family member knows about their experience. Can anyone just share a little bit about these questions? I'm sure everyone has a family member that's abroad or has gone abroad. Was it perfect? Did it happen? Did everything go according to plan, or were there ever any difficulties along the way? Yeah, please.
I think one of the main difficulties that Micronesians face when they went outside is paying the rent, paying waters and everything. Since here we don't need to pay everything is.
Yeah, that's definitely a point to remember, that you don't own the land in the US, and you have to pay rent for an apartment or a house, and there are utilities associated with that. So maybe not being fully prepared for the high costs associated with living in the US. Anyone else have thoughts on this? Brandon? Discrimination? You think they didn't know there might be some discrimination, but they experienced it? Could be an issue, unfortunately. Any other thoughts? All right, let's go to the next slide. So we all know the compact, which allows the free movement, and it's a very unique situation for Micronesians to be able to go to the US without a visa. And that, of course, has led to a huge diaspora population. That's the term for a population of people living in another country, the diaspora. So there's a huge Micronesian diaspora in the US, largely due to the compact. And next slide. And just as Brandon was referencing, there are a number of challenges that Micronesians often face. There could be cultural or language barriers. Maybe their English skills are they're not as fluent as they would like, and there's miscommunication. There could be social discrimination. Maybe they don't understand US laws, or they don't have that same support network that they're used to in their home country. On to the next. So, also, just as you were referencing in terms of the financial costs, typically Micronesians are moving to, we know, Guam and Hawaii, and those are extremely expensive places, high cost of living. And in Hawaii, 16% of Micronesian families are either homeless or living in a shelter. And in Guam, 22% of Micronesian migrants require government housing assistance. So these are statistics from 2015. And the status of Micronesians as non-citizens also limits some access to some of the public benefits. So that's just another difficulty. So all this is to say that we've read studies, read reports that a number of Micronesian migrants indicated that they wish they had learned more about what life was going to be like in the US before they left. They wish they had maybe more job skills training so they could get a higher paying job in the US. They wish they had improved their English skills, had more awareness about what the laws were in the US that they would be held to, and different legal aid. So now, to be a bit more positive, to think about the key actions you can take to stay safe if you are thinking of moving abroad at some point. So the number one point is to really take the time and prepare for the process ahead of time. You can always, I'm sure COM has resources you can reach out to if you're thinking of continuing your education in the US. You can always come to IOM for any advice. And there are also migrant resource centers, especially if you do go to Guam or Hawaii. In Guam, there's the one-stop shop for Micronesian resources, and in Hawaii, there's the We Are Oceania group, which also provides assistance to the diaspora in Hawaii. And really to inform yourself, prepare yourself, and make sure you are ready for any emergency situations, so you know what numbers to call and how to keep yourself safe. Next slide. Number one item is to always keep your ID and documents with you. Your passport, or if you have another ID, is so vital, and you might need to hand it over for short periods of time for officials to check the documents, but that should always be kept in a secure spot for you. And of course, to stay in touch with your family and friends, make sure someone else knows about your migration pathway and where you might be, so they can keep in touch and keep track of you as well. And to highlight available resources, the consulate or embassy, wherever you're going, the Micronesian one, if there is one, is a vital resource for you. So in the US, there's the embassy, and then there are a few different consulates around. So that would be your number one place to go if you are in danger or you have questions. the embassy is responsible for looking out for all Micronesians abroad. So they will help take care of you. And as we were saying, you can go to the Department of Labor to check out any job opportunities if you have questions about the legitimacy of an agency. And there are a number of civil society organizations, and as I mentioned, you can also always come to IOM and ask any questions. So, that is the end of my part on safe migration. Does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts? I hope it was a little bit informative. Because if not, we will jump right into Warren's presentation. All right, I think we're gonna jump in. If anyone outside wants to come in. Okay. All right, we're gonna go on to Warren's presentation. Oh, I don't know.
Thank you, Jen. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Warren Ching. I'm the program assistant to the human trafficking program, counter-trafficking program within the organization. And again, Genevieve Bruce here is my manager. I'm going to be touching on human trafficking, and before I do that, to my presentation, I would like to extend my deepest respects and utmost gratitude to the administration, most especially Madam Karen Simeon, interim president, VPSS, Joey Alcaro, Mr. Dodges, generous student coordinator. We have our counselor here, especially Sam, very appropriate, and all other staff here, Mr. Soswa there in the back. Thank you for inviting us and letting us do this presentation. Just for everyone's information, some of you may wonder why. Why are we presenting stuff like human trafficking? Safe migration, obviously, because we're future endeavors, of course, will be continuing education out there in the bigger world. And of course, you can also convey this information to other family and loved ones that also want to migrate, but not for own educational purposes. So, human trafficking. Human trafficking is fairly new to the FSM, especially our region. We know, most of us know that sexual exploitation as part of human trafficking has been a problem for several years. But because of recent incidents where we've had minors that were victimized, local, I'm talking about younger, from 12 years old up, were victimized. These opened up the government's eyes and prompting them to create laws, which now we have human trafficking laws at both the national and state levels. So for protection-wise, everybody has that right to seek protection from being victimized as in human trafficking. And to touch on the human trafficking incidents, I'll be touching it on the presentation, give you more in-depth information on what really happened and how it happened. And the thing is, we have this oath that we have to keep when we tend to our victims, is the right to confidentiality. So of course I won't be identifying these people, but for everyone to know that we do have victims among us. And recently we've had from Pohnpei, Chuk, and there are suspected cases like in Koshai. We have good to hear. But because of the law and prevention and awareness going around, people now know a little bit more what human trafficking is, and they can identify human trafficking if it's happening. And this is why reports are being made, and then we're starting to receive reports, and people are starting to be prosecuted. So, without further ado, I'm going to begin my presentation. Human trafficking, okay. Definition of human trafficking. We have the law right here, so it specifically states it's a crime that involves exploitation. Not only for sexual services, but for labor services as well. A person who knowingly recruits, transports, transfers, harbors or receives another person for purpose of exploitation by threat, use of force, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, or the position to vulnerability, or the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person shall be guilty of human trafficking. Exploitation is defined as the obtaining of financial or other material benefit from the prostitution of another person, exaction of forced labor or services, or the obtaining of labor or services through deceit, fraud, or by means of a material misrepresentation, slavery, or practices similar to slavery. So, within the laws here, they have spelled everything out. And they have all those corners covered to make sure that if human trafficking actually happens, you have to have all of those elements. But we're going to move to the next slide, which shows the three elements that the court or people we need to understand that we can determine that human trafficking is happening. Okay, there's the act or the activities, and then there's the means, and then there's the purpose. Okay, if you'll see the wordings in each of those three elements, they are reflected in the law. Okay, they made sure they had those in the law to make sure that if the crime happens, it sticks. Okay, in the actions of human trafficking, you have to have a recruitment going on. Then there's a transportation and transfer. Then there's harboring. Harboring is when you take somebody and either you hold them hostage or you keep them, detain them and the receipt of a person. Okay, even the receipt of a person, even though you are not the main character in that, if you were involved in that process, you are part of that human trafficking. The means is by threats, force, other forms of coercion, abduction, kidnapping, fraud, deception, abuse of power or position, giving, receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person, having control of another person. So those are the means that they use in order for them to successfully traffic a person. And the last but not the least is the purpose. Why are they doing human trafficking? Why are they trafficking people? Okay? Prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation. Okay? Forced labor for forced labor services. Slavery or practices similar to slavery. Servitude and removal of organs. Some of you may say, it's not, I mean, there is suspicion that removal of organs is also being a way of victimizing. People are being victimized by some people. There are stories of people who were kidnapped. They woke up in some other place they don't know, and they realized that they had scars on their bodies, and they went to the doctor, found out they're missing a kidney or a very vital organ of their body. And these are used in the trafficking market for, of course, selling to other people who need those body parts, but they're profiting off of this. Okay? Next slide, please. So, the trafficking of children, like minors from 18 years and below, doesn't require all those three elements. The court doesn't need to recognize the means. Okay? All you need, when it involves a minor, the only elements you need are two elements. And that's the activities and the purpose. Okay, again, you can see the elements under these descriptions. And then, bear in mind, people would say, people will ask why. Like obviously a minor cannot make their own sound decisions, right? You know, they're vulnerable, they're easily duped or fooled into attractive incentives like money or other type jewelry that they can easily be enticed and victimized with. So that when they have cases in the court, you don't need those all three elements. If it's an adult, then yeah, you need those. But for minors, again, you only need those two elements: it's the action and the means. So human trafficking cases in Micronesia. Here we go. Sex trafficking of local girls. In Bombay, between 2015 and 2017, we had some minor girls under the age of 18 recruited and forced to have sex with foreign sailors and other men. The trafficker, who was a foreign national, transported girls to the port area by taxi. Some of the victims were as young as 12 years old. So, you know, it says the trafficker, right? Well, actually it's the person who initiated that process. But if you look at the bottom of that sentence, it said they were transported to the port area by taxi. Does that not make the taxi driver a trafficker? Transported, pardon. So in reality, actually, by the cases that were held in court, there were at least 2 taxi drivers were prosecuted for their involvement. Problem was they knowingly recruited these young females from one of the local schools here at one of the elementary public schools. They frequented those areas, and luckily one of the teachers, who was pretty keen on looking out for students, had questions why this taxi was always picking up these young girls, and she made a report, an anonymous report, and it turned out that human trafficking was ongoing. So again, there were victims, and those victims are still among us. I can say, because IOM, not only do we do prevention and awareness type programs, we also assist the hosting government with victim assistance. So as of today, I am still caring for one of these victims, and she was 12 years old when she was victimized. So the type of assistance that IOM provides, of course, the government has created these laws, okay? But they are still trying to work on a model where they can integrate victim assistance into the process. After the prosecution, of course, you have to take the victims in, and they have to be reintegrated back into the community. And they have to go through a lot, because, just the trauma that they went through. We're talking about grown, big men that they had to be with, so physically and mentally they were very, very impacted. So the victim that I'm taking care of nowadays is going to school. Okay, we take care of their every basic needs, up to food items, clothing, school supplies, even transportation at times. But the most vital part of that process is the counseling part. So we have certified counselors, behavioral counselors with us nowadays, especially Bombay, have our public health, and they are very instrumental in that process. A lady works at the public health. She is the one that takes care of. Every now and then, it requires we take the child or the victim back for counseling. Every now and then they fall out because of what they've been through, and they have this behavior that's way beyond their age. So counseling is a very important part. Again, these are one of the reasons why we really want to disseminate this kind of information, and everybody knows that it's ongoing. It's ongoing now. I believe because we've been doing a lot of outreach and awareness that whoever and whatever these groups that are involved in these things, they may have either slowed down or they're trying to stay out of the picture. But there is still belief that such stuff is going on. And believe it or not, sometimes the traffickers are close, very, very close people of the victims. Sometimes related. So, yes, even a family member can be a trafficker, unfortunately. Then we have, in 2000, between 2004 and 2008, there was a recruiting thing going on from Chuk to Guam. Job opportunities were given to these young women, and a lot of promises on pay and benefits. When they got there, it was a totally different story. They ended up working in this place they call the Blue House, which is actually a prostitution and building. So, you know, when they got there, I guess they weren't well informed of their rights either, because they didn't reach out for help. And it went on for quite some time until somebody actually made a report, and then a case was built, and then they ended up arresting these people and prosecuting them. Okay, so even Guam, the nearest to us, they have these ongoing human trafficking cases in the Pacific fishing industry. The fishing industry, it goes in billions of dollars in the economy, and not only ours but in other countries. And it's known that the recruitment of crew members on the fishing vessels are most of the time also victimized by being trafficked for forced labor. They are promised certain pay and benefits, but when they go on the ship to work, they actually get physically beaten up, and all kinds of things happen to them. And this happens way at high seas. Nobody's there to help them out. And these are people that are hard up, really hard up in life. And again, exploitation is one of the key words. When you exploit the weakness of another person so you can reap profits from that person. Let's say an Indonesian worker that joins the ship. This person comes from a very poor family. They practically don't make any kind of income. He will just go all out, just accept what is happening to him just so he can make some money and send it back home. But then again, morally, the guy who's being victimized is okay. But it's the person that is employing him that is committing a crime. So, like I mentioned earlier, who can be traffickers here? Family members and relatives, believe it or not. And I can say for a fact that one of our victims, the last one that we're talking about, it was an uncle. It was an uncle of his. That's how close they were. Then we have like your own intimate partner, your own friend, friends and acquaintances, criminal gangs or syndicates, like international organized crime groups. These are groups that are very advanced in this industry. They're really, they have a system set up where they make a lot of profit off of trafficking people. And it's an organized crime. And then we have the people on the bottom here who are just practically part of the process, like taxi drivers and other corrupt officials. We have some officials that sometimes are involved, but are in the background. It's not clear to the back. So why are the traffickers in this business? Like I said, it's a multi-billion business. You know, from trading, trafficking human beings to trafficking organs. People will pay top dollar, especially if you have a loved one that really needs an extra kidney. You know, you wouldn't care, because if that person really needs a kidney, if he or she doesn't get it, he may pass away. And then, I mean, would you ask questions if you found But the thing is, that person that might have obtained that body part illegally, either by sometimes maybe possibly by killing somebody, or just by trafficking them, drugging them, and them not knowing what happened. So it's one of the most lucrative crimes in the world right now, especially because it's an organized crime. And there's low risk for traffickers. You know, I'm sorry to say that our system, our judicial system here still needs a lot of work. If I'm not mistaken, some of the traffickers, like one incident prior to the one I was talking about at the school, the parents were involved. Parents were involved, and the parents were sent to jail. And then after some time, the court turned over their decision and then released the parents. So the victim, the kids, they're back in their care. And while they were in the jail, IOM was part of the reintegration process, helping out the kids, putting them in school and everything. But the thing was, when the parents were released, that means that they have full rights back to their children. So we had to just let go, which was very unfortunate. And the recent cases where I see the taxi drivers are involved, these guys are not in jail. They've been released. One of them I know is working from jail, but another one has been released because of a plea deal. This is how our judicial system works. If any of you guys ever become a lawyer one day, please, if you have a case like this, get all the evidence and everything you need to make it stick. Because I think it was the shortcoming of the investigative part that caused the release of one of those traffickers. And that's the problem I have right now, because the victim is going to school and the trafficker is up and around. And I don't have the time and resources to be following that victim around and making eventually one day they'll be meeting each other. That's the problem. So our judicial system needs to be set up where, if a trafficker is released, there has to be some kind of maybe restraining order or something made out for the trafficker not to be within a certain distance of the victim. Something like that. Okay. Why can't victims just leave? Do we have a video of that? Is there a video? Turn off the lights, please.
In their own words, understanding the complexity of human trafficking situations.
These few quotes are direct words from trafficking survivors, explaining their own trafficking experience.
Okay, can we turn the lights back on? Okay, now you maybe by this video, I bet you can determine why some victims or those that were trafficked cannot leave. Especially here, when we have a very close-knit community, family, there's a stigma, right? Especially if family and friends find out you were part of this, you'll be labeled. That's how small our world is. But then there's a coercion, and then there's a manipulation, and you know, all these things are factors in why people are trafficked and are afraid to leave. And again, like I said earlier, exploitation of somebody really in need of money, that happens. Can anybody also say why victims can't leave? I think we have some gifts here. Yes, sir.
Ignorance.
Huh?
Ignorance or misinformation?
I think misinformation would be the correct term. Ignorance, yeah, sometimes, but you gotta remember, some of these victims are minors. They're just not at that age where they can make their own sound decisions. But being misinformed, lack of information, I agree. They wouldn't know their rights, they wouldn't know where to reach out to, who to call. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Certain aspects of culture, like complaining about work, like in the case of the Indonesian working on the fishing vessel, doesn't really have any room to complain because he doesn't know any better. He came from nothing and doesn't know to complain about what the little student.
I agree. So what he was saying was it's back to the discussion we're talking about the Indonesian crew member, which is true, because some of these guys are recruited, they aren't giving all the information they need. They're just recruited. They're saying you get paid this much, they jump at it. And they'll pay for your ticket to go where, to get on the ship, and that's it. Once you get on the ship, you're theirs. They can do whatever they want to do out there at high seas. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard that we've had some incidents recently and in the past, where crew members, I think some were locals also, that the ships came back, there were no more crew members. Like 1 or 2 crew members were missing, and the captain claimed that this guy jumped ship and all this. Why would you jump ship? You know? So, how do we remedy this? I think it's the department of, that's in charge of the fishing industry within the FSM needs to, I think, step up, come up with extra secure and safe measures for the crew members. Not only crew members, our observers. We have observers on the ships too. And these guys are actually our environment police, you know, sustainable police. They make sure these people don't fish up fish that is not marketable size, which they do. And sometimes these guys are bribed out there and they get caught up in it. Any more ideas why people don't leave when they're in a situation of being trafficked? Okay. The answer's right there. Yes, nurse.
I don't know now, but maybe in the almost 2 years ago, people were recruited to go work on pineapple farms or hospital in the U.S. And like she was saying, that some of them were promised that they would be given paid to live, and then they ended up somewhere very bad condition. And I'm just wondering, is this also, can we also say that this is a source for trafficking, human trafficking?
Yes, if you're exploiting that person for servitude labor, you coerce them into coming over to work when in fact what you know, like the salary and everything, if the living conditions are not right, that's trafficking. Again, we have those 3 elements. Okay? Remember those 3 elements that we showed? Those are the 3 elements you need to know that trafficking is happening. Thank you very much. Okay, so, you know, most of these are the reasons also why, get bondage. Some of them end up with so much debt to, I guess, the recruiter that, I guess it's the setup by the recruiters. They just make sure you stay in debt so you cannot find your way out of this. Language, culture, sometimes, most of the time. And then there's use of violence and fear. And this is actually being reported, that there are crew members that are getting beaten up out there at ICs. And especially the foreign crew members. When they get to port like Kobe, they have no source to report because they're foreign. Okay. Who can be the victims? Anybody can be a victim. Everybody's vulnerable. Okay? What can make people more vulnerable to human trafficking? What are the things that make people more vulnerable to human trafficking? One of them is like what Genevieve stated earlier in her presentation, is migration. People want to migrate for better paying jobs, and better living conditions, whatever. People want to move. These are people that they actually look at. Drug abuse, domestic and intimate partner violence, financial difficulties or debt, disaster and price increase. This is like she also mentioned that in one of those big nations out there, there's civil war and stuff going on, and people are just running away from so they don't get killed. Lack of education, lack of information, like the gentleman mentioned earlier, and an increased demand for cheap labor. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, the United States has actually I'm seeing an increase of recruitment from our parts. Of course, that's cheap labor. Because I know the people that they were like those Mexicans or whoever, foreigners that are working there now or before, they got to a point where I guess, the company will say, we're paying this much already, and we can save money if we hire some new people and start them at the bottom. And I believe, like the case you mentioned where the group that went to work for that pork factory. That pork factory, I did research on it, that's the second major producer in the United States. They make billions of dollars off of producing pork. And they get, I think, government incentives for all the production they do, and I get tax cuts or something. But they've been making a lot of money. But anyways, these people were recruited there. They weren't given full information. When they got there, they were put in a hotel. And their passports were taken away. So that's another thing every one of you need to understand if you're migrating to other countries. Nobody is authorized to take away your passport. That is your ID. The only person that can take away your passport is a government official, like an immigration official. Other than that, your recruiter or anybody else cannot take. They have no right. So make sure you never surrender your passport to just anybody. They will use that against you. How can we help survivors? Okay, I was talking a lot about victims. I started out working, and then we had a term we say VOT, which is a victim of trafficking. And then my manager here discussed with me that it would be more appropriate, instead of labeling them as victims, as traffickers. We would like to start calling them survivors. It would be more appropriate, because they survived something that really impacted their life. And who knows, they could have been seriously injured or killed in the process. So remember, it's never the survivor's fault. As I've been learning, helping out with victim assistance, the victim or the survivor is always at the center of our services. We always tend to, and we make sure that everything we offer or we have to offer there is consent from that survivor actually accepting the services. Survivors need a wide range of specialized support services including shelter, healthcare, counseling service, reintegration training. These are the services that I mentioned earlier that we're doing. So we're working closely with the national government and state government, especially the state level. We've come up with a group of they call service providers who are from those different areas. And we do tabletop exercises in case there's a victim, and we're planning on hopefully next month, if everything works out, we're going to have another training for the service providers. It's something to prepare them. So we already formed that group from the healthcare, law enforcement, all those essential areas that are part of the process. We want to prepare them, make sure they're ready. If a victim ever pops up, we're ready to receive that victim and tend to that person, the survivor, accordingly. Okay, one of our colleagues, very close colleagues, Mr. Lino Amor, the FSM national government recently established a division of human trafficking. It's called the FSM Division of Anti-Human Trafficking Services. It was recently established. They have one who is the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Justice, Mr. Lino Amor. I would like to apologize on his behalf. He was supposed to be with here today to talk about his area. He couldn't make it due to personal reasons, so I'll go ahead and just touch on what I can. Just everybody knows, just so everybody knows, there is a national division, government division that is tending to human trafficking violations nowadays. And it's run by Mr. Lino Amor, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Justice. He had a colleague working with him who's the coordinator from Pohnpei, Mr. Gini Joseph from Cotrayan. Mr. Gini Joseph recently resigned for personal reasons. So he's the only one running the office. And the division was established under public law, FSM Code Title 11. But the duties and responsibilities are, they investigate and report complaints involving possible case of trafficking. They coordinate with the national police, meaning if there's a report, they call in the national police to help out with the case. They do interviewing of witnesses, gather evidence, develop plans or training programs. We've been working together a lot for the past year since they started their division, doing a lot of awareness and training. And of course, they prepare and develop and recommend to the FSM Secretary of the Department of Justice, Mr. Joseph Stalin, program for protection of victims. That's one of the programs that they have yet to establish, is for the assistance to survivors. And conduct public awareness campaigns, which we collaborate and we are partners. So Mr. Lino Amor, unfortunately I don't have this picture I can show you, but if in any case, any of you suspect that there's a human trafficking going on, there's a hotline. The hotline number is right there. So you memorize it or write it down somewhere. And it's a cell phone, but it's free of charge. You can call it from any cell phone or landline phone. The person that will be responding to you will most likely be the secretary himself. Because they try to minimize too many people in the process. Again, we have to remember confidentiality is very important, especially if there's a victim. So the less people involved in the case, it ensures a more effective misidentification of any survivors. We all have a role to play. We all have our responsibilities, especially in the community and in the family, our own families, small and big. Stay well informed. Every now and then we do outreaches. If it's for public and you're around, come by. We try to come up with the most latest information we can. And we have that information to share when we have it. And learn more about those indicators. The indicators, those elements that we talked about earlier. It'll help you recognize and determine if someone is being victimized. misconceptions and stigmas about trafficking victims in your communities. You know, I think it's pretty simple. If somebody's been identified in the community as a victim, and then there's going to be people that are going to put that person down, tease them, ridicule them. You know, and it's very counterproductive for that survivor. It may end up very a severe situation later on for the survivor. Volunteer for and join awareness raising efforts in the communities. We try our best to do outreach to the communities, especially here, like at the schools. If you ever hear that we're coming by and you want to get involved, let us know. We can give you a part. You know, it's sharing the ownership. You know, giving each other ownership of these type of information. Once you get that down, you know, you can be that person that we also, on our behalf or on anybody else's behalf, convey this kind of information to those that doesn't have access to this kind of information. Okay. Are there any questions? I think we still have some more gifts here. Did I be the one asking for questions? Yes?
Are there any support groups of people who have similar experiences of human trafficking for them to kind of go together and go for group discussions?
Not here. So the question was about support groups. I think that is a great idea to be able to connect survivors to one another. I know globally there probably are support groups. Something definitely we could help also refer individuals to talk to someone.
If you have any ideas you want to reach out and we can work with it. I mean, that's a great idea. You know, we rely too much on the government, if I would just make it pretty simple. But as regular, responsible, normal citizens, I think we can do a lot better together, you know? So if you have that in mind and you have any plans, let us know. You might be able to work something out. Support group is very, very recommended. Any more questions? So tell me, I have one question. If there was a 12-year-old survivor, what are the elements that you need in order to charge that trafficker for the violation?
Just to
Yes.
what and why.
Okay, there you go. All right. Yeah, I think this guy got most of the gifts today. All right. Any more questions? Any more questions? Jen, do you have any questions to throw out there? I mean, we still have plenty more. No? Yeah, we don't want to, you know, we try our best to convey this information at the most comprehensive level we can, not to bore you too much. We know as students, you go through a lot already, and what is it, refund week? Some of you are anxious to leave, I know. So, you know, again, on behalf of my colleague, my boss, and especially the organization, we extend our appreciation. Thank you very much, Logis, and all those involved that helped set this up. And we are open. You know, if there's any more need, please reach out to us. We'll be very willing to come back. And I know this is like, what, 10-20%? If you want to set up another group next time, we're willing to come and convey the same information. Should you have anything?
No, just thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
So before we close up, we actually have a few gifts to present our guests today as a form of appreciation for your work and to show that we're here appreciating how much you care for our communities and we respect the work that you do. We want to give our gratitude in the form of these gifts. And we thank you for your presence today. And thank you for your invaluable information as well. On behalf of all the students and the college student body, thank you.